What's up, everybody? This is Political Frenemies. I'm Chris Newton. I'm an academic and a former Tory defence advisor. And my regular co-host to the other side of the screen there is Mathew Hulbert, Lib Dem activist and former councillor. How are you doing, Mathew?
I'm good. I'm really, really good. And for those watching, we'll get to the guy currently in the centre there in just a moment. So just bear with us. But yeah, as ever, as of late, Chris N, I've rushed back from my day to be at this podcast. As you rightly just said, pre-recording there, I am a busy man. I'm much in demand. And today I've been down in London. And I've been outside Labour HQ doing a peaceful, very peaceful, not even a protest really, but an action with my very good friends at Just Treatment. So whereas last year we took a memorial bench outside Conservative HQ, nothing to do with the party or the well, it was to do with the party in terms it was protesting their policies, but not a memorial bench about the Tories, but a memorial bench actually about so many people who've been let down by the NHS. And as you both know, what happened to my mum, and again, folks can Google that. I spent all day talking about it, so I don't really want to be talking about it here. But yeah, and so a year on, we were outside Labour HQ to say, really sorry, but I'm afraid in terms of on emergency delays, etc., it's not got better. In fact, some might argue it's even got worse. So I was doing that today, and I was on LBC News and then on Talk TV with Peter Cardwell, and then rushed back to be here for this podcast. So yes, Chris, it's been busy, but I'm here.
It's really good to see that you're back, that the trains are working okay, and yeah, you've been a very busy person, and yeah, do check Matthew's a very feisty debate with Peter Cardwell today.
I held my own.
Yeah,
Good. Very good. I suppose I should introduce myself. So I'm Chris Carter. Sure. I am a writer for LabourList, or a contributor to LabourList. Very long time Labour Party activist. I was actually a councillor at the same time as Mathew in Leicestershire when I was a councillor in Loughborough, when I accidentally won a seat for the Labour Party. And there was local elections when there was I don't know if you remember it, Mathew, there was an AV referendum on electoral reform.
Remember it well. Got nightmares about it.
I've now moved back to my native Wales, and as you know, we've got a lot of electoral reform going on here. I'll come on to that a little bit later. But I also sit on the Labour Party's National Policy Forum, and supporting, sort of guiding a lot of the policy that we're coming up with whilst in government around GB Energy, which I think is one of the better news stories about the Labour Party so far since taking office over the course of the last year. I'm going to jump straight in, if I've got permission from both of you, to talk about my reaction to what's happened this week. So we are now 12 months into a Labour government, for those unfamiliar, and the what's happened with welfare over the course of that one said last week, it feels like forever, over the course of the last couple of weeks has been described in LabourList as an omni-shambles, and many other multitudes of names that line up alongside that. Even the editor of LabourList wrote an article, sort of, I would say, he called them silver linings. I think some people might call them straws at which the Labour Party is clutching at this week. But I think he made some good points about what has happened in Parliament over the course of the last week. So the government has obviously had to water down quite significantly its welfare reforms. The lead up to that came about as a consequence of bad consultation. My friends who work in the third sector were not very happy that they weren't consulted on welfare cuts. And one of the things I think was a little bit poor was the messaging. So 5 billion was to be cut from the welfare bill. What was slightly confusing to a number of people is that was taking place in order to fund things like defence spending. So the UK has made a commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5%. That wasn't really mentioned throughout the entirety of this debate, and it ended up centering around PIP and claiming and sickness benefits as well. So the three silver linings that came out of it from the LabourList editor Tom Belger were that the concessions that eventually came about do mean that people will be able to keep their benefits. That is a good thing, and in fact, Labour Party members are very pleased about that. Another thing that has pleased one of my friends as well, who could definitely be described as being on the left of the the Labour Party, they said that it really does it does give a sense that there is still a left wing in the Labour Party. So that still exists, even though it perhaps felt as though it had been squeezed out due to the selections, the makeup of Parliament, and the MPs, the prospective parliamentary candidates that were chosen a few months before the election in 2024. And then the third one, which I quite like, and I think you two will like this as well. It does show that parliamentary democracy is alive and well. There is. Political science students are taught wrongly, in my view, as a former politics student at Loughborough. I think it's taught wrongly that when there's a big government majority, Parliament effectively becomes a rubber stamping exercise, and all legislation just gets through without so much as a murmur. So that's what I think has come out of it. That is pretty good, but ultimately the bottom line is that it's hard to describe what happened over welfare over the course of the last few weeks as anything other than a disaster. And it also has led to, in my native Wales as well, has led to a lot of tension between the Welsh government and the UK government. The chief whip, Jane Hutt, who, for those who are not familiar with Welsh politics at all, Jane Hutt is a formidable figure in the Labour Party here, and effectively the sort of quasi deputy leader of the Senedd group. She wrote a pretty furious letter to Liz Kendall. Some of the numbers in there are pretty shocking. So 14.7% of people in Wales claim these out of work benefits, or PIP as well, which is an in-work benefit, and it would have affected 190,000 people in Wales, and would have taken £450 million out of the Welsh economy, which, for in some of these are in some incredibly deprived areas, would have had an outsized effect on that. So it's created this. There is this dynamic with just 10 months to go until some very important Welsh Parliament elections as well. There's these tensions, but also there was potentially quite large political fallout that could have come about. The silver lining is that didn't happen 12 months out, 10 months out from some very important Welsh Parliament elections as well. So I think privately the First Minister will be breathing a sigh of relief that actually most of this was watered down and practically shelved. I think that you two have centered it. I'm talking a lot. I will hand over in a moment, I promise. It's just been such a big week for Labour. It's just there is so much to say. What was I going to say? Which I think you guys were talking about last week, which is there is this challenge to the Prime Minister's authority. There is this challenge to the Chancellor's authority. So the two most powerful people in the country have had their authority challenged. I would counterweight that slightly and say that actually the welfare bill did get through with a very sizable government majority.
What was left of it? What was left of the welfare bill?
What was left of it, yes. So that's it. And there's going to be this Timms review, and it's sort of elements that have been kicked into the long grass. But the government still got it through with a secure majority, and some of those waivers they did bring back as well. So these are all sort of silver linings, and like I said, or you may call them straws, whatever you want to call them. What else? And then there was Rachel Reeves, of course, who.
Well, can we come on to
of course, absolutely,
in just a moment. So just on welfare, I think you've been very balanced there, and you've said the positives, but you've also recognised that it looked fairly shambolic, and it did. Me and Chris did a kind of YouTube exclusive, as we called it, a quick 15 minutes following the vote the other night. And I think what struck both of us was that you had Stephen Timms, who widely respected, and I think the government were clearly relying on him a lot because, let's face it, I don't think Liz Kendall is especially wildly popular within the Parliamentary Labour Party. You may tell us different, Chris, but you literally had Stephen Timms on an intervention to a backbench Labour MP's speech, changing, in effect, the bill that they were voting for, but unable to actually change the bill because what was on the face of the bill still remained on the face of the bill. It'll have to be changed subsequently. And I personally, even in all of the what I'd call the dreadful Tory years, I don't think I've quite ever seen a bill being gutted on the floor of the House in an intervention by a minister to a backbench Labour MP's speech.
I'm going to just say two words to that, Matthew, and that's Liz and Truss. And that there were some much more shambolic moments where I think the chief whip resigned in the lobby.
I mean, I'm not going to defend her.
It's not good.
Yeah.
No.
That's not something to emulate, though, is it?
No,
really?
of course. I'm not saying that, but I think it was to say it's the most shambolic thing you've ever seen in the House is I think is pushing it. What I'm getting at is that the government has to get back now. They're just looking forward slightly because we can chew the fat over what happened. What has to happen now is there has to be a return to stability and strength. And what I was getting at with the actual parliamentary majority of what was left of the welfare bill points to a government that does have a very strong working majority, and that is always in a parliamentary democracy, that is always going to counter a lot of the other things that are taking place. Am I okay to talk about Rachel Reeves, or Chris, did you want to?
Yeah. Just a few points on the welfare issue and the vote, which again I think you spoke very well about. But just a few points on that. I mean, firstly, do you accept that there is a need to bring the welfare bill, the welfare budget under control, especially given that if you look at some research that the Taxpayers Alliance did this week, for a lot of the categories, the claims just absolutely ballooned since 2019, and I appreciate most of that happened under the Tories, but. And there are questions to ask and answer there, but Labour has to do this. So, secondly, does I mean, you mentioned about the left and the fact that this illustrates that there's a strong left there, but does this also play into people's fears, especially in the centre? About kind of the left on the rise again, and this is going to be a government where spending is going to be out of control and so forth. And in terms of the parliamentary dynamics, you had a lot of yes, the government got the bill through, but a lot of MPs also rebelled, and they've got the taste for rebelling now, and they might do more of it, and they might conclude, well, Keir Starmer's only going to be around for another year or so now, so what have I got to lose? So I know there's a lot there for you to.
So there's a lot. Yeah, there is a lot there. So on the welfare bill itself. So I actually sort of, unlike a lot of people who do podcasts, I actually live in a red wall seat. So and I do a lot of campaigning and canvassing. I talk to a lot of people here who are not political but have what I would call red wall sort of traits and attitudes. And it's interesting because, of course, red wall seats tend to be the most affected by those. Red wall being, by the way, for the listener. Being these sort of like working class seats that voted for Brexit and are much more socially conservative than places like Hampstead or inner London as well, which tend to vote Labour. So you've got quite an awkward. The Labour Party has always had this quite awkward voter coalition, but they call it the Hampstead to Humberside coalition. So just to bring it back to what I was going to say, so there's a lot of claimancy in red wall seats, and that will affect those people will turn out to vote, and it will affect the vote. However, people who I talk to here also see a lot of what they see as illegitimate welfare claimancy as well. And they will have quite a big stake in this, and they will be looking at this. So in terms of what you were saying about bringing down the welfare budget and the welfare bill, this is what Morgan McSweeney has been trying to push with the Prime Minister. So he has been saying to the Prime Minister, the welfare bill is getting too big for reasons that we can go into in a moment, but also the fact that the attitudes of people in these seats are really important to understand, and welfare is a very big. I would put welfare in red wall seats up there with immigration. People tend, if you sit people down and say, what do you think about politics, who are not political, they will say immigration, welfare, crime, defense, the flag, country, whatever you like to say, and those, but they will still vote Labour for various different reasons, historic reasons, or also for when it comes to their other more their social and economic policies as well. So that's kind of like that. I just want to say that's where Morgan McSweeney was trying to point this thing, but it was badly handled, and that is and bringing down the welfare bill. is I would call it a generational challenge. Sorry, Mathew, I'll hand over to you in 1 second. So is this generational challenge, and I've seen that those charts that you cited, which show that claimancy among people my age, so between 25 and 34, has shot up by 60% since the coronavirus pandemic, and nobody really understands why. This is what's so frustrating. We have this massive generational problem, and no one fully understands it, and no one really knows what to do. And it just felt as though the government rushed this out without getting to a fundamental understanding of, okay, here are the issues, this is where we need to cut, and this is where we need to focus in order to bring the welfare bill under control.
I would agree it was badly thought through. Sorry, Mathew.
So all right. So a couple of things on that. First of all, and you can answer this in a sec once I've done both points. So first of all, you referenced that, yeah, people really care about welfare like they care about immigration. I'm absolutely certain that is true. But what should the response of the Labour Party be? Should it be to play up to those things and to do kind of reform light and say, isn't this dreadful? Or should it be to say that a lot of what is said about welfare is a myth, that actually, we need to have a strong safety net, that it's an important part of our social contract with people, and to challenge some of what can often be wrong and frankly rather bigoted views by some people. So you can cogitate on that for a minute and then come back. And secondly, I forced myself to buy The Spectator today because I really wanted to read Tim Shipman's latest.
Seen the light.
I have seen the light. I'm a New Statesman subscriber, whereas I just bought it this 1 week. But I think I might end up buying it a few more weeks because Tim Shipman is very good and has got his finger on the pulse. And I'll come to his piece in a little bit. But actually, I read Matthew Parris's piece, and it was really interesting this week. I don't know if either of you have seen it, but he talks about the fact that all parties have a character, all parties have a nature, and the nature of Labour is to really care, and I would say this is a good thing, even as a Lib Dem, that to really care about social justice issues, to really care about the poorest in the country, that is at the heart of the Labour Party, and so you can be Morgan McSweeney and want to pivot all you want, but the heart of the Labour Party is the heart of the Labour Party, and a lot of those hundreds of backbench MPs, especially now, as Chris said, that they've had this taste of blood, I very much doubt are suddenly going to become conformist Starmerites and do the pseudo reform thing or whatever. Their heart is where the Labour Party's heart will always be, as Matthew Parris says, and that is for social justice and for helping the poorest in society. I mean, that's right, isn't it?
This is where that idealism clashes with the reality of power. And this is where it gets really tough for the Labour Party. You have to do some really difficult things when you're in power. And I think a lot of MPs actually have been colliding with that reality. I think, I can't remember who said which article I read it in, but a lot of people came in and thought they were going to be the next John F. Kennedy, and have quickly realized that the country is in a very difficult state. There are many things within public services that are not working as they should. We have an aging population. Social care costs are increasing rapidly. It's not also that's been left to local governments to deal with, and the local government is financing is practically on its knees. All of these things need to be. That's just one example, right? There's how many fires do you actually want to try and put out in one time? How much can you actually do? I would actually step away from this a little bit as well, because one of the things that I'm observing as well is that people are expecting Labour to do a lot of things in a very short space of time, and it's just not possible. And with the pressures that are coming on, especially when you think about foreign policy for a moment, Chris, you'll probably want to say a few things on this too, but having to increase defence spending whilst having all of that going on domestically, nobody seems to kind of discuss this, and I get really frustrated. I'm like, we're increasing defence spending. It's one of the biggest departments. It's one of the most expensive departments. We haven't got enough people in the armed forces, and we need to spend a lot of money to recruit those people. But Chris,
But Chris, can I just say, we have an impatient electorate, and you can not like that as much as you want, and I agree. I sometimes wish the electorate was more patient, but they're not. They want delivery today.
Yeah, but this is what I'm getting at, is that people need to, this is what I'm trying to say. The whole nature of the beast has become centered around, we want instant gratification and solutions now. But you can't, and this is what I'm talking about. This is the idealism against that reality of the world of the world of politics and how it actually delivers. Those are, and then sorry, you talked about that was your one point. I answered your second question, forgot your first one, which was, I think, was on the legitimacy of claims in the heart of the Labour Party. Of course, it is with helping the poorest. And actually, there's some pretty major pieces of legislation going through Parliament right now. There's the Workers' Rights Bill. That's a huge domestic achievement for the Labour Party. There's the increases year on year in the minimum wage. So, just before I came on here now, the Labour Party's polling had improved by 2 percentage points, according to Survation. What this is about as well is also about raising living standards too. And the Labour Party needs to get their arms around that. If they can increase wages and cut costs, whether it's across energy and with the planning and infrastructure bill, likely with housing as well towards the end of the Parliament, and the Renters' Rights Bill as well is going to put a lot more control back into people's hands. They need to sell that stuff much better. This is all really good stuff. This is the renters basically make up the vanguard of Labour's electoral coalition. Get them back on side. There are lots of places that the party needs to refocus now. And I wouldn't say a reset, because Rishi Sunak had 9 of them in 2 years, for example. I'm not talking about reset.
I think Starmer's had a few of them now.
It's about saying, right, okay, it's like, let's sell this thing slightly better to the electorate. It's going to take a little bit of time, but look at all this good stuff that's coming down the track. That's where I get a little bit sort of frustrated with the whole thing. The comms needs to be better in the Labour Party. It needs to be communicated better. Everything seems to focus on all of these horrible negative things. When I'm the chair of a local constituency party, and people like to sort of kick off at these things, and I'm like, yeah, but we've done all these things. We've got rid of the Rwanda plan. You're happy about that, aren't you? And yeah, of course we are. We've increased the minimum wage. Yeah, of course we're happy about that. No one talks about all of this good stuff, and that is where there's a comms failure, I think. It's good when Labour empower people in the bottom, getting back to the heart of the Labour Party. People in the bottom 20% of earners always do better when Labour are in power. They do. It's happened under Blair, and it happened. Seriously, you can see those income deciles, bottom 20% of earners, their incomes go up under Labour. And that is what is happening this time as well. And I strongly feel that, even though things aren't great right now, it will get better.
Shall we move on to Rachel Reeves? Because I know.
Just on that. Well, do you want to say? With me and the other Chris have said a fair bit, so I'll let you speak, Chris, then. But I do have something to say on Rachel Reeves, perhaps before we let the other Chris in. So yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to? Do you want me to just go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll go ahead. So yeah, and so and I know Chris N has been very public about this on Twitter, and so he can have his say in a moment. But I went online to say, I have no reason to not accept what has been said by her team, that something was going on in her personal life, and unlike some from within Labour and outside who were kind of demanding that we be told what that is, I don't think it's any of our beeswax. It's her personal business. But I also think that even with that having been said, image in today's political world, images mean a lot. They can mean more than thousands of words, right? And whatever the reasoning might have been for it, the image of her breaking down in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's questions, and then added to that, Keir Starmer, for his own reasoning, which he hasn't explained and probably won't, throwing her under the bus, which he did during PMQs. I know he subsequently said a lot, but during PMQs, he was asked by Kemi Badenoch, is she here to stay? And he deflected. He had to go at the Tories and then waffled on about something else for a couple of minutes. So she was sat beside him in tears for whatever reason. He did that. This was a horrendous look for the Labour Party and for this government, and that image will be remembered for a very long time. I would agree with that, and images do matter, and that
those pictures have been sort of circulating around sort of the front pages of the newspapers and everywhere on social media as well. But where I would disagree with you is that I would say under normal circumstances, yes, maybe Rachel Reeves didn't have to disclose what the personal matter is. The problem is that there's an alternative narrative going around, accusation, speculation. I'm not saying any of this is true or not, because we don't know the truth at the moment. That, let's just say certain people had a row with Rachel Reeves before PMQs, and that was what triggered the crying. And given that you remember the allegations of bullying with Tory ministers, and how much Labour sort of made of that, and how serious that was considered. I think that there are sort of serious accusations flying around here, and I think it needs to be cleared up one way or the other. Is are the accusations true? Or are people being economical with the truth? And I think it's important also because, of course, whatever the Chancellor does, the markets react, and the markets did react to what happened.
They absolutely did. And from what I gather, so obviously the next morning we saw her at the NHS launch fund, which I gather she wasn't expected to be there. So clearly there'd been some rushed decisions about, we must get Rachel back out in front of people, smiling and looking happy, and it was good to see her. But yeah, I mean, me and you, Chris, then just disagree then a little bit about that, because I think, and none of us know, and this is the whole point, but if she's got a family member that's ill or something like that, I don't think that's any of our beeswax, and I don't think she should be forced to have to tell us. But equally, where there's a void, people will fill that void. That is perfectly true. And so if they're Labour, I don't quite know what they do about that.
You can't have it both ways, where where it's and again, I have sympathy for her. Okay, I don't want to give the impressions that I don't have sympathy, but you can't have your cake and eat it, and saying, well, 1 minute it's good to emote, and then the next minute is none of your business. It's all private, and it has to be all sort of bottled up. You've got to choose really one or the other, don't you?
Well, it depends on the seriousness of the issue. And if it is a serious, Rachel Reeves is a tough cookie, right? And is kind of was sort of, people were calling her the Iron Chancellor. I wonder whether that will continue, or this is just sort of a blip in her story. I want to talk about the markets, because you're right. This Prime Minister almost sort of didn't back her. I watched PMQs. I felt that was interesting. Starmer's political antenna is notorious for not always being necessarily the best. Right. And if we were to look at it, I don't know, in the best part, showing Keir Starmer in the best possible light, he didn't answer that question especially well. Rachel was obviously having a personal issue which was just affecting her, and the way the markets actually reacted. Let's not forget what happened when it looked like Rachel Reeves was going to go. Bond yields went up, so that meant that the markets were worried that she was no longer going to be chancellor. Usually, the bond markets are the reacting like that. The death knell of a chancellor actually saved her. The market saved it, because it said, actually, because the market was like, well, hang on, who's going to replace Rachel Reeves? Are they going to spend more money? Is there going to be does that mean there's going to be, the reason they move is because they think there's going to be an increase in supply, because the government is going to issue more bonds. And that's what happened. The bonds, if Keir Starmer was planning on getting rid of Rachel, then the bond markets wouldn't have been especially happy. So my view is that it actually has strengthened her position, and it would have crystallized in the Prime Minister's mind how the value that she actually brings. And I think we can sort of move on to talk about the fiscal rules a little bit, because of course, the Labour Party the elements of the Labour Party really do not like them, because it is effectively restricting the amount that they can spend on reinvesting in public services. And that is going to be, there's always going to be this tension between them. There is also this, I think, view that the Chancellor is sometimes weak. In fact, she has maintained the fiscal rules. Where her hand is now going to be forced is over taxes. So in the run-up to the election, bear in mind, this is her project along with Sir Keir Starmer. in the run-up to the election in 2024, the Labour Party said, we are not going to increase personal national insurance, VAT, or income tax. Okay, one of those three taxes.
Why did it say that? Why did it say it?
Because they wanted to win. They were ruthless in the.
They were going to win.
No.
The Tories were dreadfully unpopular.
They were being totally ruthless on that route. Don't forget, if people think their income tax is going to go up, that has an extremely negative effect on left-wing parties coming from opposition into government.
And this is on the back of Corbyn as well.
And exactly. So they had to keep that fiscal discipline. They even dumped. I was mortified when they dumped on a personal level, when they dumped the Green New Deal. I thought it was going to do some fantastic things for the economy and also driving us into sort of the 21st century when it comes to green and clean energy. We've got GB Energy, so I can't complain too much. But back to that, there was this ruthlessness about winning the election. And now that Labour are in power 12 months in, coming back to sort of the anniversary, there is this real tension over the fiscal rules and tax and spend. And one of the only taxes that is probably left that would raise the funds necessary to fund the sorts of things that elements of the Labour Party wants to spend them on is probably fuel duty. One of the pieces of research that I read said if fuel duty hadn't been frozen since 2011, the UK would have an additional £40 billion per year to spend on public services. I would probably add a pinch of salt to that because, of course, people will buy less petrol if it's more expensive. But that's one of the few levers that they have left to pull where they haven't made a pledge previously. I think they can tinker around the edges of things with capital gains tax and wealth taxes. But really, that's where the funding may have to come from in the next budget. And if you think things are tough now, look at where the next budget could potentially go in terms of tax rises, further cuts to public spending in potentially other areas. There was the international aid cut as well, which really did, again, going back to the left wing of the Labour Party and probably Mathew, the Liberal Democrats as well. I want to give them at least a mention in all this because there is.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that's where things are at. There's going to be a very, very difficult budget further down the line, and I do wonder where the government is going to look to raise funds, probably from tax and probably from cutting spending in areas that would be deemed unsavoury.
Chris?
Yeah. I mean, is it interesting that you say about fuel duty, for example, because every time the Tories threatened to do that, they didn't in the end, and that and again that could be potentially an area where Labour could find themselves in real difficulty, especially if you think about sort of poorer sort of rural communities, very sort of reliant on cars and so forth. So it's interesting that you said that, but that could be some real sort of political sort of difficulty there. But this also speaks of the notion that Labour hasn't got the public finances under control. The welfare bill was supposed to be a means of helping to do that, and the tax rises, potential tax rises in the next budget. It just plays into that fear that this is not new Labour. This is an old-fashioned sort of tax spend borrowing Labour, and there must be some real concern about that.
Well, can I just come in there? Just going back to Rachel Reeves in the parliamentary situation this week, I wanted to ask Chris Newton. So Kenny Badenoch, and I know it's in the cut and thrust of PMQs, but whereas Starmer claims that, I personally find this really tough to believe. I know that he's focused on answering the questions, but the idea that he had no clue at all that his chancellor was sat beside him in tears, I find that difficult to believe. But Kenny Badenoch definitely knew that something was wrong, and she went in for the kill. Now, you may say, Chris N, that that's her job. She's the leader of the opposition, but actually, and I've mentioned before that she appears to lack kind of like being able to show human compassion for people, and I think this was another example. I mean, it was pretty nasty, was it not?
Well, I watched it back, and firstly, when I initially watched it, I knew it was obviously clear that Reeves, there was something up there, and I tweeted about it, and I tweeted live about it. But it wasn't actually until after Starmer actually didn't sort of back Reeves that I noticed the tears rolling down her face. So I don't know if that point she was actually crying. So where Badenoch was speaking, Reeves was actually crying at that point. I don't know. So that's the first thing. But also it also seems to be that Badenoch was reacting to Reeves at that point, because Badenoch referenced her. She said something about, well, she can point all she likes, and Reeves was evidently sort of shouting and pointing at her. So I think it was a response to what Reeves was doing, and I don't think what she said was that bad. She said she looked miserable. She could have said something far worse than that. So
well, she could. I thought what was interesting as well, and I've no reason to believe that there was some kind of dispute beforehand between Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner. But what I did think was interesting was that Angela Rayner, who was sat to the other side of Keir Starmer, kind of sat there ramrod straight, kind of head high. And I think Angela Rayner is one of the most interesting characters and personalities in this government. I've got a real soft spot for her.
Whatever she was doing, she was looking very pleased with herself, wasn't she?
Well, she was looking very pleased with herself, but I think she's authentic in a way that both Reeves and Starmer find it difficult to portray their authentic selves. And I know that Angela Rayner does a lot of protestations. I mean, she did on Lorraine this week on ITV that she doesn't want to be the Prime Minister. But I always take such things with a pinch of salt. I think if the opportunity arose, she would be the Prime Minister, and I think she's biding her. I think she's biding her time. But I thought that was another one of the really interesting images of the week. Starmer in the middle doing his thing, Reeves on one side traumatized, and Angela Rayner sat there, looking pretty strong. I thought that was quite an image.
I personally don't tend to read too strongly into the PMQ runes, although this one was exceptional. Badenoch has got to be a bit careful here, because there is this sense that the nasty party is back. I think there was this incident, but also previous calling Angela Rayner names, effectively calling it, I think, called a ginger nut or something along those lines. And they have to be a little bit careful about how they handle Rayner, because she evidently wipes the floor with pretty much everybody she comes into contact with on the Conservative side, and she did that in her shadow briefs and is doing that again at MHCLG. She is quite a brilliant performer, and I would put her in that sort of category of authentic John Prescott. Jess Phillips, actually, on the Labour side, is another great example of a hugely authentic. Maybe I'm being maybe a bit frightening in terms of operators. You wouldn't cross them if you see where I'm coming from. They are two very tough people, and people respect that strength as well. And just one more thing I want to say on Badenoch. She landed some punches this week. Finally, she's been. I would say at the moment there's been a lot of speculation about her leadership as well. She's probably grateful to have a bit of respite this week, that there isn't speculation around her own leadership. And Rob Jenrick did do one of his usual weekly videos, but actually went down really badly.
I mean, that was even worse. He was even worse than Badenoch. I mean, Badenoch was in the cut and thrust of PMQs, and as you quite rightly say, I think Rachel Reeves had been pointing at her, and so cut and thrust, but. Robert Jenrick's video was something that he decided to do after all of that.
Well, he may have filmed it beforehand. I think it was very quickly afterwards.
But he decided to put it up regardless of when he recorded it, and his team decided to put it up, and it was a conscious decision. And I thought that reflected Chris N very badly on him and his judgment.
Well, it may. I mean, I doubt that he was able to film all of that, and then because he put it out like an hour or so.
But he chose to put it out, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he should have. He should have waited. Given everything that was happening. But yeah. So there could have been sort of more sensitivity to the actual what was going on in. Afterwards in Prime Minister's question, but also in terms of kind of nasty party allegations, I go back to kind of the allegations of bullying, which I'm not gonna single out sort of individuals, because again, these aren't, we don't know if they're true or not. And you, Mathew, you were vocal about somebody who's at the receiving end of the the telling off allegations of Rachel Reeves. Again, I would go back to this notion, and again, not many people have kind of picked up on this. If it is the case that you're having cabinet ministers shouting at other cabinet ministers to the point there that making them cry and visibly cry in public, that's not a good look. That's not good. If that happened with the Tories, and again, there were lots of allegations of bullies under the bullying under the Tories, they got absolutely crucified for it. So I don't know why Labour should get away with it.
These are rumours. This is not. These aren't actual facts. That nobody.
But we should get to the bottom of it and determine whether they're true.
They have said it's a personal issue. I'm just going to challenge it slightly. It's rumours versus someone saying, "I've got a personal issue at the moment." They may be the Chancellor of the country.
I agree.
But I also said at the time, my reaction to watching Reeves in tears in the Commons and people saying, "Oh, it's a brutal business, this politics," that it really gets to the core of where I think the guttural politics that we now have. People are constantly under so much scrutiny constantly that they can't. Matt, I also want to pitch this question to you and the listeners as well. What if Rachel Reeves had not gone to Prime Minister's questions?
Well, quite.
A load of speculation about her position. What's going on? Oh, is Keir Starmer going to sack her? And all of the speculation would have come out. Really, she had no other option other than to be in that room. If it is, I believe her. By the way, I know, Chris, you've got some reservations, but
I don't know. I just don't know at the end of the day. That's the thing.
But Chris N, you know, let's just be honest. You've basically been saying on Twitter, in effect, we demand to know, and I put to you that it's none of our beeswax.
Well, I mean, I only said it in the context of other people are receiving these allegations of bullying, and all I've said is that I think whatever the truth is, given that it's unfair that other people are receiving these allegations that they made her cry, and again, we don't know whether they're true or not. But you think to clear their names, you would have thought that the truth would have come out.
But several things can be right at the same time, can't they? It can be both true that she had some personal issue, which I don't think it's any of our beeswax to know. But then also, in that emotional state, it could also be true that, for example, I think the Speaker did have some words with her. And that might have been like the final straw for her. That might have been the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of her emotional reaction. So both of those things can be correct.
It can be correct, but at the same time, people have had allegations against them, and I think their names should be cleared.
These are professional politicians. I mean, they have allegations made about them all the time, and the fact is, the facts as we have them are that the Chancellor was had some sort of personal issue, still had the courage to turn up in the House of Commons, and everybody, with the entire country watching her, having to go through whatever personal issue that was. By the way, the following day turned up and I think pretty much lit up the room with a speech about the National Health Service. And this is so I just want to say as well, and this also speaks to how good the government. I think this is what we're going back to comms. The government went straight on from that on the next day talking about the NHS, where they are having a lot of success. I know, Mathew, you've been in London today, and I think emergency response times are something we definitely need to look at. But getting a GP's appointment now is much easier, and there are a lot more appointments, and the government is now going to try and refocus on GP's appointments. I live in Wales, where we've had huge problems with healthcare provision. I'll come on to that in a minute and in the next segment. But those are the government is now going to try and refocus on its areas of strength, following it possibly one of the most difficult weeks in the early years of being in office.
So can we? I know there's a couple of things that so much has gone on this week that we focused on that more than we've almost had a year's worth of activity in one week. but widen it out a little bit more into the year. As I say, I bought the Specky today, and I thought Tim Shipman was, as always, very perceptive, and he talked. He talked about this document of Morgan McSweeney's where he kind of predicted where Labour would hit trouble, and has basically been proven right. But I just thought this was a really interesting paragraph. So Tim Shipman writes, McSweeney's view was and remains that this is as much a commentary on Labour as it is on Britain. When the Tories win power, they always do so with the aim of retaining power. The decisions they take are always oriented towards winning the next election. When Labour wins, we seek to change the world. And that goes back to what I was saying about the heart of the Labour Party being the heart of the Labour Party. And the heart of the Labour Party isn't, I applaud this, it's idealistic and I like that. They want to change the world, and they want to change the world today. They want it done now. Whereas the Tories, their main aim is to retain power. And that is why they've governed for most of the last century. I mean, that's right, isn't it?
Well, in the run-up, the prime example I always give is Mathew, when your party was in coalition with the Conservatives at 2010 to 2015 Parliament. Do you remember George Osborne introducing Help to Buy in 2013, 2014? I'm sure you do. And someone said this is the ultimate election-winning handout to people, because if people buy their own houses and they live in their own houses, they're much more likely to feel safer, more secure, and to thank the incumbent government for having done so. And that was a demand-side reform, okay? And they were able to do it very quickly. People were able to buy their homes quite quickly in the run-up to that election. And it gave the Tories that very narrow, well, not narrow, but sort of 30-seat working majority in 2015, because those key commuter belt towns had people who felt comfortable and were going to vote Conservative. When we talk about power, very nakedly, if you want to win power in the United Kingdom, you need to win those sorts of commuter belt towns around urban areas that basically make up the majority of the swing seats in the United Kingdom. That's or the southeast of England, however you want to frame it. The focus is often on them. So what I would say if you want to get a flavour of how serious Labour are about winning a second term, watch what they do in 2020. If we have it in 28, look at what they're doing in 2027, second half of 2026. I suspect it will be around housing. The problem that Labour have is they're going for supply side reform. And that takes much longer. It takes much longer to build houses. It takes much longer for them to get planning permission. And it will probably have an effect in the next Parliament. So they have to think about where they're going to focus to win the next election within the next 24 months, I would say.
It's still going to be impossible if they don't bring immigration numbers down as well.
Which they have done this year, right? Because I think immigration halved this year. So they can point to that and say, because those last 2 years the Conservatives were in power. I mean, let's face it, letting 1 million people into the country in those 2 years absolutely shredded and one of the reasons a lot of people
are first to complain.
So one of the reasons reform, we'll talk about reform a bit more. One of the reasons reform is doing well is because the Tories shredded their reputation in those last 2 years over immigration. Labour are trying to position themselves as securing the borders. I'm sure we all follow Mike Tapp on Twitter, and he's very big on
I met him the other week.
And he's a great MP. He's a very smart guy, but very much focused on that kind of wearing the flag, border control, and controlling immigration. That is, the Labour Party can do that, but they can't do it in the same way that the Reform Party can. You can't out-reform on immigration. And the Tories have, and Chris, you may disagree, the Tories have ceded that ground due to their record in government.
Mathew knows we've debated this countless time. I mean, I thought the Tories were absolutely atrocious on immigration, and again, I've never really defended that record in government, because the wheels really did fall off, especially in the later years.
But what's really interesting is that I sit here as the kind of woolly liberal, and I'm phrasing this in a way that isn't wholly true, but I feel like you two can have your discussion about who is doing the most to stop immigration. I want to sit here and defend immigration as a good, as a positive, as something that in many respects benefits the country, both economically, socially, and culturally. And again, I wonder how many Labour MPs also sit there thinking, who's going to speak up for the good that immigration has done and the fact that the NHS couldn't run without it, etc., etc., etc. And it really, you say you can't out reform, and you can't. And what Ed Davey and my party would say is that, of course we've got to have an immigration system. No one denies that. But what we'd also say is that we should be positive about the benefits of immigration. And I do just worry that the Farage effect on British politics is that both the current two main parties are on a pathway down to try and attract the basest elements in our electorate, and I'm certainly glad that my party never does that.
I would strongly disagree with that. What Labour are doing is they're bringing down the headline numbers to a number that is more manageable. And thinking about this completely strategically, they are hoping that the conversation will then move on from immigration being the number one issue among voters. Why I think that's slightly naive is that there are two very visceral images in the United Kingdom at the moment when it comes to migration. One is boat crossings, the border crossings taking place on boats, and there's so many humanitarian problems. It breaks my heart to see people making that crossing and potentially drowning and putting their lives at risk. It's a very visceral image that I think the right-wing media say is demonstrative of an invasion. I don't agree with that. I think these are some very desperately poor people trying to build a better life for themselves. And then of course there's migrant hotels. And those two, if the government does not get those two visceral images under control, it's not even about the numbers. The evidence is they are going to get the numbers down now, and that will continue to trend downwards. What they need to get under control are those images, and also finding a way to get the asylum systems working, because Conservatives did break it. They closed off every single possible legal route you can take to be in the United Kingdom and claim asylum legally. And that has had a huge effect. I think about places like where I live, especially in red wall seats. There's a lot of fears around migration. But I lived in London for 9 years, right? So I'm like, I sort of think, what's wrong with this? It's great. People are coming here. They're making better lives for themselves. The food is fantastic, and you just think to yourself, it does that. Just to name one thing, but culturally, it has a very positive impact when you have those numbers at a manageable level.
But Chris, would you agree? Chrissy, would you agree that? And it's an argument I've used to Chris N many times before, but it happens to be true that when people who voted for Brexit, the communities who most voted for Brexit, when they ask those people and who say that the main reason why they did so was immigration, are in the places with the least immigration. So this isn't about lived experience. This is about the fear of the unknown. And it's a fear of the unknown that's whipped up by parts of the media. And it's one of the reasons why, sometimes I get asked by my liberal friends, because some of my liberal friends hate the fact that I go on kind of, right-wing TV and have a good old Barney. One of the reasons that I do so is because I'm going to darn well take the opportunity to challenge the rhetoric of some of what is said on some of these issues. And the audience are going to darn well hear a different point of view. They might disagree, but they're going to darn well hear it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a good thing that you're going into the spaces and saying that, because it will be the first time in some of those echo chambers people will be hearing that perspective. I'm a big advocate for that. What you have to remember, though, is that you're saying it's where areas of immigration are the lowest, but there is still immigration to those areas. And people, when they people come to the United Kingdom, they don't go to live on, nice, leafy middle-class estates where sort of like, probably where the three people on this podcast live. They go and live in areas of where there is also shared deprivation, because there's nowhere else for them to go. And so again, going back to those visceral images I talked about earlier, people from those communities are among the first to sort of see these new arrivals and them trying to live and make their way in Britain. Some of them will be given social housing or temporary accommodation as well. So don't dismiss it out of hand that there's no immigration there. They see it themselves. And also, and they are led, and I think we need to empathise a little bit as well, because people are not used to this, and they're saying, "Well, I was never asked about this. I'm not comfortable about this." It is also having a conversation with people, saying, actually, people who come here and try and make a better life for themselves should be more than welcome. And I was on the train yesterday with a sort of a former neighbour who actually now runs a very successful IT consultancy, and that his parents came here with nothing, and the contribution that people, first generation and second generation immigrants are some of the hardest working people you will ever meet, and the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is testament to that. And I think we have to really balance the discussion when it comes to migration. Say people who come here and work damn hard have every right to be here.
Do you want to say anything more about sort of Labour's first year, or should we just rattle through the other parties now?
Do you mind if I do? Is that okay? Or
yeah,
I feel like we've covered it a bit, but we have to look back at this year as I would put it almost like Starmer's first year as leader of the Labour Party, which, as you remember, was very difficult. There were things like the Hartlepool by-election. Starmer moved around a lot of people at the top, and it took time for that to be felt further down. And you pointed some fantastic people into very senior roles. Sue Gray was actually very good, by the way, I thought, in opposition, and also Matthew Doyle as well, who's chief comms officer. He made some fantastic appointments that saw Labour win, a landslide victory. I mean, we can talk about the top line share of the vote. I've got my own opinions on that. What I would like to see from Labour going forward, look at the next year and this Parliament, is that same impetus, that same strength, that same strategy, whilst in government. And we learned how to do that in opposition, and I don't know what happened, but something just something just happened. Labour were elected, and large elements of that went out of the window. We wasted a lot of political capital in our first year on welfare, the winter fuel allowance, benefit changes. That there's no more room for mistakes anymore. A lot of political capital is now being used up. The focus of the Labour Party, what has to be going forward, is to learn from this first year in office and start pushing a much better, more positive story, and also having an overarching vision for the country to talk about. If I went out to voters now and said, what's the Labour Party's main mission in government, they almost certainly wouldn't be saying fixing the foundations. It has to be something. If you were to define Tony Blair's government, what would you say? Education, education, education. Okay, David Cameron, the big society. These big ideas that actually bring their coalition of kind of voters together, but also gives people hope as well for the future. I mean, that's what I would say Labour needs to do.
Didn't you find it incredible? We're a year into Starmer's premiership, and to be honest, Sunak's the same. I put Sunak in the same category, so I'm not just having a go at Labour, but we're a year into his premiership, and I still have no idea what he believes in or what he wants to do.
Well, this is the point that I wanted. So I've got a couple of points and then a question for Chris C. It did seem to me. So Chris N will tell you that I, despite the fact I'm in a different party, I'm a Lib Dem. But I was optimistic for this new government. I said on this podcast that I thought the adults were now in charge, and Chris N kind of mocked me at the time. But I thought, no, let's wait. Let's just wait and see. And yet it appeared, I don't know why it is, but it appeared that the government set out to upset, in turn, a different group of the electorate. If not every day, then every week. Pensioners and farmers, and then people with disabilities, and it was like, what group has Labour not upset this week? And so I don't quite know what was going on with that. And I mean, I feel like I'm an advert for the Spectator today, but it's just because I was meant my train ride back reading it. And actually, James Heal had. I know. So I knew you'd love it, Chris. So James Heal wrote what I thought was a really powerful piece, and I know we're going to come on to reform quickly, but I just thought that this point is worth repeating now. You talked about that people are saying that old Norman Lamontism of Labour being in office but not in power. But what the really interesting thing was that for reform, he reversed it. That in a weird kind of way, they're in power but not in office. And I thought that was a really clever bit of writing. And I think there's an element of truth to it, that the wheels have ever so slightly come off. Now that doesn't mean that the wheels can't be put back on again, but it's not a great look after just 1 year in power, I thought.
Just before Chris comes back on that, I mean, I've written out a whole list of what I consider to be sort of Labour, failures, whether it's on the the winter fuel
I'm sure you have,
payment,
Chris.
even so like the Chagos deal, the freebie gates, the private schools closures. Has Labour spent basically most of its political capital in this year, and will the memory of this year is that going to be pretty much impossible to reverse?
One of the things I would counter that with is that as well, the electorate is the most volatile it has ever been. I've never seen an electorate this volatile, which means it can swing to reform, but it could just as easily swing back to Labour within 12 months again. And this is what I'm talking about. They've got to start offering people hope again. I think I'm starting to see the early signs. Just for background, so I work for an opinion polling firm. I'm starting to see some of the early signs that reform is starting to recede, and the excitement's over, and reservations.
They lost two council by-elections this week, one to the Dems and one to the Tories.
I do want to talk about reform now. But you said you had a question for me though, Mathew, because I want to talk about reform.
Oh yes, I did. Well, Chris then kind of alluded to it, and it's basically, the question is, what is Starmerism? I know what Thatcherism was, and can agree with it or not. I knew what Blairism was, and you can agree with it or not. I have no idea what Starmerism is, and I would say, and you'll know whether you'll know more, Chris, say about whether I'm right or not on this. But my view is that at the heart of a lot of the government's problems is that there's no ideological core. There's no basis. There's no kind of heft. There's no kind of basis on which everything else springs out from. And if there's nothing at the centre that can be explained in a coherent way, that is why Labour has been in the trouble it's been in.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. What is Starmerism? Everyone sort of talked about the Ming Vase strategy in the run up to the 2024 election. Everything was sort of played quite safely. It is a very good question on what is Starmerism. I'd have to come back to you on that one, but I shouldn't. But I'm going to have to come back to you on it. The places that I'm blinking, right, because I sit on the National Policy Forum and I look at this stuff. But what is actually happening in terms of planning reform and getting houses built and energy infrastructure built and green energy and sort of moving the grid over to a cleaner, greener energy? Those are great things that are happening in the background, but take time. It takes a long time to build stuff. It takes a long time to build reservoirs and roads and rail and all of these other things as well. We won't talk about HS2 because that's just a whole can of worms. But what I'm just saying is that my view is that there's a lot that is going on in terms of that's kind of nebulous, and up here talking about growth. The government's not very good at communicating in terms of retail politics. So one of the things I would say to them is take this stuff you are doing on house building and cutting energy bills and make sure that it's abundantly clear that is part of this broader vision of what you're going to do. There's sort of 5 or 6 pledges that were stated in the last election. Those seem to have fallen by the wayside. Are we going to get those back out again? Where is the focus going to be? And how would you define it? Would you define it as education, the big society, where the builders, not the blockers? Whatever it is, it needs to be stated now repeatedly and right up until the next election.
Can I just ask kind of one final question on all of this? So we had another interesting development last night. I mean, it did turn mildly farcical, but it's nonetheless an interesting development that we've now got the beginnings of this new left party being started by Jeremy Corbyn and I always get her name wrong. Is it
Zara Sultana?
Zara Sultana. Although it's interesting that she came out saying she was going to co-lead this party, and today Jeremy Corbyn is saying that she's going to be involved somehow. So that I mean, that's not a great start for them. But assuming that they kind of get something together, and then you've got the interesting prospect. And we'll see what happens with the Green leadership election. But I certainly think that if Zach Polansky, who I know from his Lib Dem days, if Zach Polansky wins, and the Greens do become a proper eco-socialist party, and he's a very good communicator, Zach Walensky, whatever else you may say about him. This may be overstating it, but he could kind of become the left-wing Farage. There could be, if those two groups were to work together, that could be quite a threat from Labour's left, and then you've got my lot who are kind of sitting pretty in the middle, and I put out a tweet today saying that you've got that electorate. I don't know how big this group is, but you've got part of the electorate who are fed up with the two old parties, but who would never vote for Farage or the far left. Who I think the Lib Dems can hoover up those votes by being a very sensible, maybe a little bit boring kind of moderate party of the centre, who kind of go under the radar a lot, but who people basically like and basically trust. And I mean, I guess the question then is that who are the voters for the Labour Party?
I'm not convinced by this whole thing. The Labour Party brand has a lot of strength and a lot of equity, and it is very difficult to break that. And don't forget, the Labour Party made Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana who they are. What I would say, though, is that the launch was absolutely farcical. As you saw, half an hour later, it turned out Jeremy Corbyn hadn't agreed to this. The people to watch, by the way, it's not Zara Sultana, it's not Jeremy Corbyn, it's not those independent MPs that were elected. The people to watch are those who were suspended from the Labour whip. So John McDonnell, those kind of characters, shortly after the election for voting for that SNP.
And some of them have said, they're not joining.
No. And and the other thing to think about as well is where's their funding going to come from? There is not a major trade union in the land that will back this party, from what I understand. Even some of the more militant, the national, I forget what it's called, National Education Union, they wouldn't do that, because also it would alienate them from the people who actually hold power within the Labour Party. They don't. There's no thought that's gone into this. It just seems like quite literally a sort of Sultana protest sort of garage band that doesn't really. I'm not entirely sure what the point of this thing is. Also, the Green Party has kind of has held all of these pissed off Labour voters. I mean, in Wales, it's sort of Plaid Cymru who have hoovered some of those up, and again, can talk about that if you want me to. But what I'm saying is that the launch of this new left party actually affects the Greens much more, because it sort of takes those votes away from them, and then you're sort of left with kind of like these odd sort of Green voters. There
would have to be a kind of a rapprochement between those two parties if it was to become. It'd be a bit like
when Change UK tried to take your Lib Dem voters off you in 2019.
Never going to happen.
You can't occupy the same space as another party in a first past the post system. You can't do it. You have to strike deals, and you have to sort of come up with alliances and ways of working. I don't think they'll be able to do that.
I don't know if we want to get on to Reforms Week, because the really interesting thing there is that something has happened on the right this week as well. Something very similar in that Ben Habib, the former deputy leader of Reform, has launched his own party. I forget what the name of it is now, but he's launched his own. He's launched his own party, and then who's the other guy? Rupert Lowe has launched something which apparently isn't a party, but kind of looks really like a party, but apparently isn't one. Which Susan Hall, leader of the London Assembly Tories, has joined, which is kind of like a party, but not a party. And so you've got all of this weird stuff going on, and I say that's good, because hopefully it'll split the right wing vote, Chris N.
It's all getting sort of Judean People's Front, isn't it? Really, with all these different groups and parties.
Yes.
I mean, from my perspective, the right vote is split enough. We don't really need any more of it on the right. But Ben Habib, I like Ben Habib. He's very good on TV. He's a very good communicator.
But it's not going to be viable, is it? This? It's not going to be viable.
He's not established. He doesn't have the established presence of Farage. So this is very much Ben Habib getting.
And don't you think
Farage?
And don't you think? Well, it clearly is. It clearly is really the whole point of it is to try and have a go at Farage and get some of his votes. But I also think as well that there's some people in British politics, and it does tend to be on the right that this happens. They just like to be able to say that they're the leader of a party, right? So you've still got what I call the barely continuing SDP, which, even though for a second time in their history the other month they came behind the raving mad loonies in the polls, still carry on because they've got this guy, I think his name's William Clouston, who likes to be able to go on Talk TV and others and say he's the leader of the SDP. And I just think, for goodness sake, man, pull the plug. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Just let it go as well.
Yeah.
With Reform, like I said, I live here in Wales, and Reform have just taken the lead in the polls for the Welsh Parliament elections next year. So if they're not, there may be some trouble on sort of your side of the border, but this side of the border, it's a very different story. We have a fantastic journalist who covers Wales here called Will Hayward, and he is just perpetually baffled, along with the rest of us, as to how Reform don't have a leader in Wales. They don't have any policies, and they refuse to tell what their policies are. They had their last party conference not far from where I live, which is basically at the first stop when you get to Wales, just over the border. They'd had their conference there. Will Hayward went around interviewing these guys, saying, "So what are you going to do about the Welsh NHS?" I said, we're going to cut waste. And then they'll interview some of their politicians here. So they do have a small local government-based defectors, and the odd by-election that they've won. And they say, "So what are you going to cut to cover this waste?" There's no answer. It is absolutely absurd that a party with no policies and no leader this side of the border has effectively taken the lead in the opinion polls. What is, looking at some of the data, what is counting in their favour as well as the new electoral system that we've introduced in Wales? So we're effectively moving to a PR system, or we're gradually going to move to a fully PR'd system. The one that we've got at the minute is, I would spend much of the evening trying to explain it, but basically what it means is that Reform can win lots of seats, and people are slightly unhappy with the Welsh government. If you think people have got incumbency penalties around the world, try having an incumbency penalty of 26 years. It is pretty tough. Yeah, it's pretty tough. The Labour Party have been one of the most, they could sort of brag saying they're the most successful political party in the democratic world, which is true. 100 years of coming first, is with the exclusion of the odd Euro election, coming first over the course of the last 100 years. What this means is that there is this odd dynamic now that has taken hold here in Wales, and that you have kind of almost a credible party of the left, which is Plaid Cymru, which is a Welsh nationalist party. And on the surface, people over the border think they're this quite nice, very left-wing sort of fluffy Welsh party. Anybody who's ever had to deal with them on this side of the border knows that actually there's some of the most in terms of attitude, the most socially conservative people that you can possibly come across, especially when it comes to things like the Welsh language, which again, won't go down that rabbit warren either. And their pitch now is that it's us or Reform in the run-up to the next extended election. So you've got this multi-party system that's turned the whole world on its head, and the people who are in front, in terms of the opinion polls, the Reform Party have got no leader and they've got no policies. So whatever happens over the course of the next 10 months, if we have reached peak Reform, you sort of hope that it does happen here, because if Reform do win, the civil service will just end up having to run the country, because they won't be able to, as we've seen with local councils they've taken control of, they won't be able to run things, and that's evidential in the way that they're running many of the councils they now control.
So Chris C, will we see in Wales something akin to what we've seen in the Republic of Ireland, which is that the two old kind of warring, disputing parties, Fine Gael and Fine Gael, going to government together to block Sinn Féin from being in government? Will we see? I know Plaid and Labour have been in power that one time before, but will we see basically, the two old in Wales kind of warring parties, Plaid and Labour, form a coalition to block Reform? Is that what we're going to see?
That would, well, it's sort of what's happened already. So we signed a cooperation agreement with them at the start of this Welsh Parliament term in 2021, which Plaid Cymru then left 2 years out from the election, probably because they were trying to get out from under us. And we do like to give them sort of great big bear hugs in the run up to, especially their voters as well, in the run up to elections. That's kind of how it's typically worked, where Mark Drakeford in the run up to the last election called for home rule in Wales, and then a load of Plaid Cymru voters sort of switched into our column, and we won the 30 seats out of 60, so one short of a majority. So just to provide a little bit more context to your answer, the likelihood at the moment is that there will be a Plaid Labour administration for the time being. The reason for that is actually because of the collapse of the Conservative Party in Wales. Things do not look good for them at the moment. One poll showed they were going to lose the vast majority of their seats. And one of the interesting things about this is, will it lead to the destruction of the Conservative Party as a force in Wales, or will they be able to claw it back? Or will they become a junior partner in a reform-led government, but they wouldn't actually be able to run anything? So how would they be able to reach that arrangement? It's a very complicated moving object at the moment. And I get the sense that the potential coalition partners and makeup of it all could end up sucking a lot of oxygen out of the campaign. Rather than talking about policy, everyone's going to be talking about, well, who you're going to be in coalition with, who you're going to do deals with. And that is, I think, unfortunately, that is the nature of the PR system that we've chosen. But I don't know if that's good for politics as a whole.
And it looks as well, and I'm very saddened about this, because liberalism has a great history in parts of Wales, and I think people like David Lloyd George and others. But it looks as if I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Chris C. But from what I've seen, it looks as if we'll be lucky to hold on to Jane Dodds.
I would think you would hold on to Jane Dodds from what I'm seeing. I think you're sort of hoping to pick up another seat as well. Look, the Lib Dems in Wales have proven to be very, very sensible deal makers. They're quite ruthless in coalition negotiations and in budget negotiations. Jane Dodds got a lot for her constituents in her seat in Mid Wales. If people were to say, I think if you genuinely held a gun to the head of the First Minister and said, who would you want to do a coalition with next time, because you have to do a coalition, she would probably say the Lib Dems. I imagine most people in the Labour Party would, because Plaid are incredibly prickly and they're very driven by their drive for independence. And some of them, like I say, some of the issues they're quite focused on can run counter to many of the things that Labour wants to do. The thing that actually brought us together in the cooperation agreement was housing and introducing taxes on second homes as well. That actually was kind of like a unifying force that kind of kept that cooperation agreement together, and electoral reform as well. Now that electoral reform is no longer on the table and much of the housing policies we were going to introduce are gone, there's not really a binding agent anymore between the two parties, and Plaid are desperate to break up the United Kingdom, and Labour just simply aren't.
So in terms of, can I just say this very quick, small little thing, Chris, and then I'll give you loads of time to say whatever you want, because I just want to bring a local element to Reforms Week from here in Leicestershire, because I think it's kind of reflective of perhaps what it's going on at all these councils that they now run here in England. So this week, and again, instead of focusing on, potholes or adult social services or schools or any of these important things that county councils do, here in Leicestershire, they tried to change the name of the Environment Committee to take climate change out of the name of the committee, because, that is what
sensible.
Chris N. And then but because they're a minority here in Leicestershire, thank goodness, the combined opposition, including the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, the One Green, and I think an Independent, gave reform in Leicestershire their first defeat, and climate change remains in the name of that committee. But I just thought it really emblematic of them. Me and Chris Andrew talked about this before. They need to be seen, from their perspective, they need to be seen as credible. And they now run these councils, and they've got to deliver these services. And I agree a little bit with Chris C. that beyond the culture war stuff that they're obsessed by, in the end, it's going to be the officers that are running these councils and trying to keep the train on the tracks, because these councillors from Reform are just not up to it.
Well, I would echo what Chris C said about Labour earlier. Is they've only been in power a couple of months, and obviously you've got to give them time. Just as Chris C has been appealing, has been appealing to give Labour time to make an impact, and also some of these issues. Okay, maybe changing the name of committees, but also the flag issue as well. I mean. Again, maybe Chris C may not agree with me. But things like the flag, yes, they might not be at the same level as providing sort of services, potholes, bins, and so forth. But people do care about them. And,
it's pure culture, Chris. It's pure culture wars. It's pure culture wars. That is all it is. Trying to say that the pride flag can't be flown.
There's a subset of our country which are, very patriotic and do care about these issues.
What has that got to do with
culture wars? But they're still important to people.
Chris, what has people being patriotic got to do with a council not being able during Pride Month to fly the pride flag? That is all about blooming bigotry and homophobia and pandering to the very basest in our electorate. That's what that's about.
Can I just wanted to say as well, because I'm with you on this, Mathew. I don't think flags. I don't really care. Probably some people in Wales might care if they started flying the St George's flag outside County Hall. But this is not to say it's not important. It's emblematic of them as a party and as a political force. The thing to watch with reform is when it's budget season. So when they've got to start putting the budgets together, that's the most important thing you do as a councillor. I've been a councillor. The most important thing you do as a councillor is you make sure that your sums add up and that you make sure you're able to deliver services. What councils are finding across the United Kingdom right now is they're having to put up council tax to pay for ballooning social care costs.
Right.
If they can't, there's no alternative. Every single council, whether it's Conservative, whether it's Liberal Democrat, whether it's Labour, whether it's Plaid, here in Wales as well, all of them have had to put up council tax to pay for base level delivery of services, especially social care. In Newport, we also have another problem, which is that we've got a growing population of young people, so we're getting pinched at both ends. So in fact, the schools budget has gone up as well. So we've had to go to the government. We got the biggest settlement of any council from the Welsh government. It's tough out there. I speak to leaders of the council all the time, and they talk about how the intensity of negotiations between their councillors and the officers and making all of this work. If you have a group of councillors who are not up to the job and not able to put a legal budget together, which balances all of those things, or just simply refuse, for example, saying, well, we don't want council tax to go up, we think it should go down. Well, what are you going to get rid of in order to cover that? And the waste that reform have been trying to find is non-existent, because councils have been cut to the bone over the course of the last 15 years already. So where's the waste? They're struggling to find it.
So come on, Chris N, where's the waste? Come on, where is it?
Well, we'll have to see what the Doge or whatever it is comes up with.
Give me a break. Yeah.
Well,
I feel like we're ganging up on you, Chris.
I know, I'm loving it. This is my favourite podcast ever.
Local government isn't my area of expertise, so it has. We'll have to. We'll be very interested in what this exercise comes up with.
About your area of expertise, shall we get on to the Tories week? Shall we just do that really quickly?
Yeah.
The Tories week and then the Lib Dems week. So the Tory week. Well, Christine mentioned it earlier. I think. I'll give Temi Badenoch some credit. She does seem to be getting better in the House of Commons. I thought she's had a couple of good. Performances. As I say, I thought some of what she said at PMQs this week were a bit unkind. But in terms of delivery, etc., and getting her points across, I do think she's improving, and I think I want to give her credit. But again, the only difficulty is that reform take up all the oxygen, right, on the right, almost all the oxygen. And, let's just think about the order yet again in which we've done things on this podcast. Labour, yet because they're in government, and then Reform. And it's because Reform are making all the running on the right. And so as a former Tory advisor, Chris, and I mean, I know you were both specifically on defence, but nonetheless, I mean, you know, I mean, what should their advisors be advising? I mean, how do they get some of that oxygen back,
and
some of that publicity back?
It's very interesting, because if you look at the personal polling, yes, she has a really sort of poor favourability rating, but also there's a big chunk of people who either don't know what they think about her, or don't even know who she really is. So whatever she's doing, she's not cutting through. And I think part of her problem has been that she hasn't been energetic. She hasn't been getting on the airwaves. I mean, so Ian Dow was talking about this, wasn't he? She hasn't been. Okay, you cannot at this stage of the parliament devise very detailed policies, but you can make speeches. You can ask parliamentary questions and freedom of information requests. That's difficult as well, because the answers you're going to get are going to be reflective of the previous government as opposed to this government.
Right.
So that's easier to do when I was advising opposition towards the end of a government as opposed to the beginning of one. But she's got to get out there and do speeches, set out the direction of travel. Set out, what she believes in. Again, we've discussed this in the past. She has a good story to tell about herself, yet hardly anyone knows about it. So find subjects and area and topics that you can at least set a direction about, and make speeches. Issue press releases. Do what Robert Jenrick's doing. I mean, as much as you criticize him about what he did this week, he's actually making impact. The video he did about fare dodging and ticket barrier jumping. I mean, that got cut through, didn't it? And she needs to do. Why is it that Robert Jenrick's comms operation is far superior to the entirety of CCHQ's? I don't know. So they've got to be creative. We've got social media now, and she's got to make use of all of these tools that she has at her disposal, and she hasn't really been doing it. That's the problem.
Right, and so Chris C. So in terms of the Tories in Wales, and I'm always intrigued, by the way, this is just an aside, as to the fact that I'm right in saying, aren't I, that the Tory leader in Wales is not actually the leader of the whole Tory party. He's actually just the leader of the Assembly group. And so I can never get my head around that, because I think I'm right in saying that the leader of the Scottish Tories is the leader of the Scottish Tories.
Yes, that's right. So it's slightly a bizarre arrangement. I couldn't possibly explain as to why. They've recently undergone a leadership transition, so they've switched from someone called Andrew R.T. Davis, who I've had many a run-in with over the years.
He's the Brexit means breakfast guy,
he's
right?
a very aggressive operator, and I think he basically pushed his luck too far and was replaced with the slightly more sensible, moderate Darren Miller. But they're not getting any cut through in Wales at the moment. They're really struggling, and we're talking about reforms, sort of sucking that oxygen out of the environment. I don't know how they recover. I don't see how they do any better than where they presently are. It can actually somehow get worse for them. I won't denigrate them too much, because they had their conference recently. They've also, to their credit, they had a number of people in their party calling for the abolition of the Welsh Parliament, which is just electoral suicide these days. Such a small fragment of the population agree with that. But even the Reform Party are saying, we support the Welsh Parliament and its existence. And to their credit, they have pushed out the troublesome potential candidates who were calling for the abolition of the Welsh Parliament. So that may do them some favours, because they were about to jump down a rabbit hole from where there was no way back, and I think they probably could have lost all of their seats had they done that.
Well, with the minute or so left, shall we turn to the Liberal Democrats?
I'll leave the floor to you, because yes, again, I have no idea what they've done this week.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, that when Chris N does the lovely bit of write up here, this lovely briefing for us, and God love you for doing that, Chris N, each week. He always puts a question mark under the Lib Dems, which I just think is so unfair. So I've actually just jotted down a couple of things that I wanted to say about our week. First of all, I think kind of going under the radar is a little bit of a strategy, I think, and I think it's not necessarily serving us badly, because most of the polls seem to suggest that we will gain. Just hang on just 1 second. That we will retain our 72 seats and gain some. We're still likely to be in third place, but so there's that. Our 72 MPs are working hard in their constituencies, which Lib Dem MPs have to, because we don't have safe. Unlike you two, we don't have safe seats. We have to fight for. I think we have one safe seat in kind of the upper Highlands of Scotland, Alistair Carmichael. But beyond that, we have to fight for all of our seats. And so our MPs are working hard. And then something that really did cheer me up this past week, and I know it's only one council seat, but I do think it's emblematic, is that in Durham, so Darren Grimes' backyard, we took a seat directly off Reform. And it was interesting that, I'm not saying that this is some major shift yet, because it's not, but I thought it was interesting that the Reform did lose a couple of seats this week. One to the Conservatives in Nottinghamshire, where a councillor had resigned, I think, just a few weeks into being a councillor. And
I think
then
that was
this
a health issue.
Was it?
That was
well, whatever the reason was, the Tories took the seat, and in Durham, which, as I say, Darren Grimes' backyard, he's the deputy leader of the county council there now. Heaven help them. The Lib Dems took a seat. So it is really, I think there's positives to be said about the Lib Dems week, Chris N, and I think you're very unkind to put a question mark underneath it each week.
I was going to say, Matthew, I don't like the Lib Dems under the radar, because I want Ed Davey doing silly things on television. Bless him. What could have been quite a dry campaign last year. Actually, there was at least some entertainment from the Lib Dems. It seemed to work.
And the electorate liked it.
In very concentrated parts of the country, yes, they did like it. I think I've always got a slight, as much of a soft spot you can have for another party, because I did my dissertation on the Lib Dems back in university, and I say this to people as well. There's nothing more dangerous in politics than half a dozen Lib Dems and a printing press in your local, in your local area, and a small group of them can get together, and next thing you know, they've got seats on the council, and they're causing all sorts of trouble, and they're ruthless when it comes to those local battles as well. With all of that, the one of the things we were talking about just before the call is that the Lib Dems have got 72 MPs. They're polling pretty well, and have been for a while, and better than they have done since sort of post-coalition. And one of the things that baffles me is how much more Reform get platformed in the media than the Lib Dems, right? And what I always say is that people say, "Oh, we can't understand this rise in populism." It's like, well, first of all, they're in every single news studio literally all the time, rather than doing their jobs as MPs and elected representatives. But also, there is a credible party of a credible party of the centre that never gets platformed. And you sort of think, well, wouldn't the answer to populism be to platform a party that has 72 MPs? And
so a couple of things on that. I think you're right, and I do think news editors and producers and others have to be asking themselves some questions about that. But having said that, we had Peter Targon on from Talk recently, and he said something really interesting, which really saddened me, and which I, when I'm at Lib Dem conference in September, I need to grab some of our party head honchos and ask why on earth this is going on, because he said that so ordinarily, obviously, Talk is not our friendliest of stations, but Peter said that on this policy that we announced of people who go on buses and play loud music rather than listening to headphones, he said that he absolutely agreed, and he wanted to get a Lib Dem MP on to basically say, I agree with this policy, good on the Lib Dems. Lib Dem, and he tried, his producer tried, called up the Lib Dem press office. No Lib Dem MP was provided, and I've heard this from other TV people as well. So I wonder how much of it is programs not platforming us, and how much of it is, I'm afraid, us not being on the ball enough to get MPs on.
So it's almost, that's interesting. It's a party operational issue and not Okay, it's worth considering.
If it feels like you're doing all of the Lib Dems media,
Yeah.
Matthew.
Well, I know I just suck up all the air, there you go. But yeah, so I think there are things to talk about the Lib Dems, and we're holding our own. But do I agree that we ourselves, a bit like Timmy Badenoch, could be doing more and could be doing some kind of platform speeches and et cetera, et cetera? Yes, I absolutely do think that. And believe me, when I go to Lib Dem conference in September, which I'm chairing a fringe, by the way, but more on that to come, then I shall absolutely be making my point of view clear, as you'd expect.
Fantastic.
Right.
Well, this has been so fun, hasn't it?
This has been great. Yeah. No, really pleased we've got you on board, and looking forward to having you on again, because I think
Absolutely.
you really do provide a really great perspective. You've got the Welsh perspective, but your analysis is also very sharp and very interesting as well. So thanks very much, Chris.
Thanks so much. I'm wasted on my friends here in Newport who aren't political. They sort of have to listen to me ramble on, but it's great. It gives you but genuinely, it gives you, being outside of London gives you a fantastic grounding in the real world. And Matthew, you're up in Barwell in Leicestershire, which I always have a soft spot for in Leicestershire too, because I spent
part
of my youth there.
Well, quite right. Unlike Chris M in London, that's not the real world at all. I
think Wales is where the real world is. But over the next 10 months, people are interested in all of this stuff. Labour are in power at both ends of the M4. It's going to be a seismic election if things continue as they are. So really glad to be on the podcast, and great to be flying my little Welsh dragon flag for my team. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And so what I just want to say very quickly before we go is, folks, whether you're watching or listening, please do all the internety things. Please like, please subscribe, please follow us on what I shall call Twitter at Political Frenemies. Please tell your friends. Our audience is slowly building, and so we're really happy about that. And we know that with Chris C on board, the new viewers and listeners will come flooding in. I'm absolutely certain about that. So I've really enjoyed this today. I must admit, I'm a bit exhausted now after the day that I've had, but this has been fun.
Well, we'll let you go and have something to eat now, because I'm sure you're tired, and you said you haven't eaten for a while, so we'll let you do that.
Lovely.
Great. What spiciness do you have?
It was just medium. I'm a liberal. I'm a moderate. Medium.
Okay. I went medium as well.
That's my life. So Chris M, I shall see you next week.
Yeah.
And we shall have Chris C back on in good short order.
Thanks very much, guys. Good to meet you finally, Matthew. We've sparred online for years. So
we have. I tell you. Me and Chrissy are good. A good online friends. But we used to really have some ding dongs, didn't we, at one time?
We did, yeah. But that was when I was a Labour councillor. Now I'm a free agent.
Okay.
Lovely stuff.
It's goodbye. It's goodbye from all of us. Do join us next week on Political Frenemies. Goodbye.